38 Special versus 32 H&R Magnum, and what I have today is something a little bit different than what I normally do. I normally like to use the exact same brand of ammo for doing comparisons, but I can't find a fair way to do that, so I'm using two different brands that make this test fair. And I'll tell you what I mean here. It looks like our 32 H&R Magnum is actually, even though it's a Federal, it looks like it's using a Hornady XTP bullet. So our 38 Special is a 125 grain XTP Hornady American gunner, rated at 900 feet per second. And our 32 H&R Magnum also looks like an XTP 85 grain, rated at 1120 feet per second. So these are both standard loadings of those calibers. And I'm using essentially the same barrel lengths. We have our 4 1/8 inch barrel Smith & Wesson 686 to test our 38 Special, and our 4.2 inch Ruger SP101 and 327 Federal to test the 32 H&R Magnum. So we're going to go through the chronograph, see what kind of velocity and accuracy we get at the same time. Then I'm going to do my 10% clear ballistics gel test. So we're going to go into plain 10% clear ballistics gel to see what the best potential of those are. Those are pretty low end calibers, so I want to at least see what the hollow points look like expanded. So we'll do a plain clear ballistics gel shot to hopefully see that. Then we'll move on to doing a real world simulation, 4 layers of sweatshirt material on this first 3-inch piece that represents hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, then another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard at the back to represent hitting back ribs. In that particular format, that's about a half representation of the density of flesh. So if we got like 16 inches in this gel block, that's more like 8 inches in a real living target. So we'll do our plain clear ballistics gel shot, then our real world simulation shot, and then I will shoot at the steel target to see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. So let's get started with this test. All right, first up we have our 38 Special 125 grain XTP. That's rated at 900 feet per second. And I do believe that is through a 4-inch barrel. So let's see how close I get to 900 feet per second through my 4-inch barrel Smith & Wesson 686. $918, $952, $907, $902, $905. So we're just a little bit above that rate of velocity, which is good to see. Now our 32 H&R Magnum here, 85 grain, jacket of hollow point, XTP, rated at 1120 feet per second. I believe that is, again, through a 4-inch barrel. I'm using a 4.2 inch barrel. Let's see how close I get to 1120 feet per second. $898, $963, $956, $954, $1,004. That was not what I was expecting at all. This is a long enough barrel. We should have got 1120 to 1150 feet per second based on their rated velocity and barrel length. So that is loaded really light for some reason. So I'm not hopeful on the performance of this. So let's hit our ballistics gel block and see how these compare. All right, first up, our best potential shot, our plain clear ballistics gel shot. I call it our best potential because there's no fabric that can clog a hollow point to prevent expansion. There's no rib simulation that can slow down its potential for penetration. So let's see what we get here with our 38 Special. All right, let's hit that with our 32 H&R Magnum. Let's go take a look. All right, so very interesting performance. We got a lot of smoking going on here for some reason too. It's like maybe there's a little bit of dieseling going on. Yeah, that's crazy. Honestly though, on our first 3-inch piece, that's kind of surprising. On our 38 in the bottom, our 32 H&R Mag on top, I thought that we would just see straight lines. But it does appear that there is some level of expansion going on here, even with that 32 H&R Magnum. It's kind of hard to see, what's going on exactly with that 32 H&R, but both of these actually have a pretty good energy dump and damage and tearing going through. We have striation cuts that would indicate an expansion going on, causing that that damage rather than tumbling. So these look like they did perform very similarly to each other. Our 38 Special, we went right to 17 3/4 inches, a nice straight line penetration. That's actually pretty perfect. And our 32 H&R Magnum, we went to about 15.5 inches of penetration. So just a little bit less penetration because it was a little bit less powerful. So looking at this overall, I can't really say one looks significantly better than the other. It does look like even at these low velocities that 32 H&R Magnum is pretty comparable. 38 Special, that's interesting. Let's put it on our fabric, put in our rib simulation now, and see how these do in our real world simulation. All right, our real world simulation, 4 layers of sweatshirt material followed by 3 inches of clear ballistics to represent hitting a pectoral muscle, followed by a 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard to represent hitting ribs or sternum, 16 more inches of clear ballistics, and another 1/4 inch medium density fiberboard at the back to represent hitting back ribs. Ideally, I'd like to see some expansion, have these go to at least 12 inches, but without passing through the back rib simulation. So let's see if we get here with our 38 Special. All right. Let's put that with our 32 H&R Magnum. Let's go take a look. All right, that's interesting. So I'm not really surprised here with the lack of expansion with the 32 H&R Magnum. I am slightly surprised with the lack of expansion with the 38 Special because it's still a 38 Special. It's still got decent amount of energy. It's moving fast enough that it should theoretically still expand, and it still didn't. Now with the 32 H&R, we have very low velocity, very low energy. The difference here is I can definitely tell that the 32 H&R Magnum is tumbling more than the 38 Special. So we'll take a look at our first 3-inch piece here. Not a whole lot of damage going into that first 3-inch piece, but there's actually a tad more with our 32 H&R Magnum for some reason. And going through our rib simulation, they're both going through straight. So I do like to see that, because if they were not, a lot of times that will cut the penetration down. And we can see, but they still penetrated fine. So going through nice and straight, that's actually a positive attribute. Tumbling can be good, but we generally don't like it because it's kind of inconsistent and erratic. So these both went in a pretty good straight line, even though there's obviously some yawing or tumbling going on because the bullets are backwards. And it looks like our 38 Special, it went a little bit further than that bullet. You might not be able to see that little bit of a track, but we went right to about 18.5 inches, which really is just totally fine. It looks like it could have touched that rib simulation in the back. I don't really see a whole lot going on with that. So that's actually pretty good overall, even though it didn't expand. And our 32 H&R Magnum, we got good penetration. We're about 15 3/4 inches. Just no expansion. So looking at this, they're not bad overall. Ideally, I'd like to see more expansion, or at least some expansion through our real world simulation. And you can definitely get that if you go up to, plus P, a 38 Special plus P, or go up to a 327 Federal Magnum or something like that, or a non-standard 32 H&R Magnum plus P. But with just standard loadings, yeah, they're going a little bit too slow to get that expansion through our real world simulation, but still, these are consistent enough that I would say they're pretty good. I would use them because they're just low enough in the power that even if they don't expand, they don't over penetrate. So not terrible performance, not ideal, but not terrible. So let's pull these bullets out of the block. We'll take a close-up look at them. Then I'll shoot our steel target and see what kind of practical accuracy and shootability I can get with these. Alright, so here's a close-up look at our bullets going through plain gel. Here's our 38 Special, and here's our 32 H&R Magnum. So they did do about the same thing. It's just that the 38 Special is an upscaled version of that 32. And I still get questions from people like, why do you do the plain clear ballistic gel shot? That's not realistic. Main reason is because if you've tested enough ammo like I have, and you're testing a lot of low-end calibers, a lot of times I would go months with never seeing what a particular bullet is supposed to look like expanded, because the fabric would always cause it to fail to expand. So taking a shot in the plain clear ballistics, they generally always expand, so we can at least see what the manufacturer wants the bullets to look like if they perform. And this is what they're supposed to look like, going through fabric and whatnot. But when they actually do, things are not so good here. 38 Special, 32. So again, it's just a scaled up and down version because they were moving at the same velocity roughly. So you don't get really much difference if you're shooting a lighter, smaller bullet at the exact same velocity. You're going to get less energy, but what it does to the bullet is a gradual. It's relative to itself. So in XTP, bigger or smaller, moving at the same velocity, you know, they're relative. You know, if we took like a 45 versus a 10 millimeter, something like that, and that 10 millimeter was loaded really light, and we push them at the same velocity, well, they're both gonna fail to expand. So I like the consistency though of the fact that they are consistent. They're velocity based and consistent, and because we didn't get enough velocity going through fabric, that we're going to see that issue. And if we push them a lot faster, like if we test the 327 Federal with an XTP or the 357 Magnum, they generally always expand. So I do like the consistency of them, and there is something to be said for the fact that a non-expanded hollow point often does still remain in a straighter line going through the target. It also causes more damage for some reason, like somehow that hollow cavity does something to tear the target a little bit more than just like a smooth bullet, like a Full Metal Jacket or lead round nose. And then they don't over penetrate. So the consistency wise, I think this is not a terrible choice considering that these are very low recoil. So not bad, not terrible overall. So that's a close-up look at those bullets. All right, 14 yards from the target, just my practical shootability distance here. So I just want to pop up these rounds as fast as I think I can hit the target. See if there's a big difference in the recoil and shootability of 38 Special and 32 H&R Magnum. So 38 Special, 14 yards. Let's see how this does for me. All right, those are shooting a little bit high and right for me. Could just be me. 32 H&R Magnum. Let's see how this does. All right, I think they'll shoot a little bit better for me out of this revolver, so that's pretty good overall. So let me back it up and fire from some more distance and see how these do as longer range rounds, like for maybe hunting or something like that. All right, 75 yards from the target here. This is kind of our SHTF hunting simulation here, or scenario, or maybe outlier situation. If something happens where you have to shoot from a very far distance at a pretty clear threat, I think these rounds actually would perform well on something like a white-tailed deer, or really any thin-skinned anything around the 200-pound range. I think these would actually work, but probably more so with the 32 H&R that you'd have to have better shot placement. So let's see what I get here with our 38 Special. 75 yards, just firing slow. So far, so good with those. Keep going with that 38 Special. All right, so those things are quite consistent and accurate overall. 32 H&R, I'm not sure about this. I'm not so good with this particular revolver. Let me try one single action. Okay. Got it. Keep going here. Huh. Don't know where they went because I couldn't see any impacts in the dirt. And it's like I hit that first one, so it's got to be something to do with that trigger press. It's significantly different than my Smith & Wesson, because if you go from all hits at the 38 to one, I mean, I fired less rounds, but still, that 32 H&R just wasn't that accurate for me, or at least it wasn't hitting to the right point of impact for where my aim was at with that round. That's probably more likely what's going on. There's different rounds hitting different places, and if you don't have your gun adjusted for that, it can be a problem. So good performance overall I would say here. I had somebody ask me a few days ago about the Hornady XTP bullets and what I thought about them overall, and honestly I think they're a really good overall bullet. They don't do anything like any particular thing well on its own. Like, it doesn't like have the biggest expansion, it doesn't have the best penetration, it doesn't have this or that, but it does everything really well for a pretty good price. You know, they make fantastic reloading bullets because they are pretty much everywhere. Anytime I've walked into any type of store that offers reloading equipment, it's always the Hornady XTP is the #1 bullet there. And they are consistent, they are accurate, there's a lot of reloading data on them. When you get rounds that are preloaded like these, very accurate, very consistent. They always seem to penetrate pretty well. It's just that their expansion is lacking a little bit, but that actually makes for a pretty good hunting bullet. So overall, I honestly think if you don't know what to go with, what your use might be, target shooting, personal defense, hunting, you can't go wrong with the XTP. It's not going to do any one of those things the best, but it's going to do everything pretty well. So I think it's a good bullet here. Now look at these particular loadings. I am kind of surprised at what I'm seeing here. You know, our 38 Special and our Hornady loading, perfect. You know, we got just a little bit above that rated velocity, but really so close to it that you can say we pretty much got what was advertised. We got good accuracy, we got rated velocity, and the performance is what you might expect. So actually that's not a bad round. If somebody had an old Smith & Wesson Model 10 with a 4-inch barrel, or a gun like my 686 or something like that, and you wanted less recoil, that's a good go-to round overall. And you get 25 rounds in a box, so it's a good price too. So I'd say it's not bad. Now that Federal personal defense, that was disappointing because, you know, I was kind of banking on everything being that was going to hit rated velocity, because if you look at the rated velocity of both of these, the 32 H&R Magnum and the 38 Special had almost the same energy, with the 32 H&R Magnum actually being, I don't know, something like 10 foot-pounds more energy based on the rating. So they were close enough that they are comparable, but when you get a loading that's like however much below it was rated velocity, 250 feet per second below rated, now you got this really weak round that's kind of, you know, not going to perform all that well. That being said, it did still do the same thing the 38 Special did. Now, if we actually did get the rated velocity of 1120 feet per second, I have no doubt that that would actually expand on our real world simulation. That would have actually made it better than our 38 Special. It would have performed better. But being loaded at the same velocity with basically the same bullet, you're going to get the same thing going on, just a smaller version of it. So kind of disappointed with that. So, but even all that being said, not bad overall, not bad performance. So that's what you get today. So as always, comment, share, and like, and thanks for watching.